There's a moment right after betrayal when the world feels different, like the ground beneath you has shifted just enough to make you question if it was ever solid in the first place. You replay the moment over and over, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a friend who broke your trust, a partner who walked away, or a colleague who undermined you. No matter how it happens, betrayal carries a unique kind of pain. It's not just about what was lost, it's about the story we start telling ourselves because of it. Here's what I know. Betrayal doesn't just hurt, it rewires us. Studies show that social pain, like rejection and betrayal, activates the same regions in the brain as physical pain. So when people say it felt like a punch to the gut, that's not just a metaphor. The body registers betrayal as a real wound, and like any wound, it needs healing. But the challenge is, unlike a broken bone, we don't get a cast. There's no visible marker that says handle with care, still healing from trust trauma. So where do we start? How do we even begin to heal from something that feels so deeply personal? Healing from betrayal isn't about pretending it didn't happen or rushing to forgive and forget. It's about walking through it, one step at a time. And while there's no quick fix, there are some things we can do that make the process real, honest, and most importantly, ours. First, name the pain. Betrayal creates a shame story in our heads. I wasn't enough. I should have seen it coming. I'll never trust again. But shame thrives in secrecy. Research shows that simply naming what we're feeling, anger, grief, disbelief, begins to loosen its grip. It doesn't fix it overnight, but it takes away some of its power. I remember talking to someone who had just gone through a brutal betrayal. A best friend of 15 years had walked away without explanation. No fight, no falling out, just silence. And the worst part, the unanswered texts, the not knowing. She told me, I feel pathetic for missing her. That was the first story she started telling herself. That missing someone who left somehow made her weak. But here's the truth. Pain doesn't make us weak. Pretending we're not in pain does. Our emotions don't just disappear because we don't acknowledge them. They go underground, and when we push them down long enough, they start running the show in ways we don't even recognize. Snapping at the people we love, numbing out with distractions, shutting down in ways that keep us from fully living. There's a reason why psychologists say, name it to tame it. Neuroscience tells us that when we name what we're feeling, when we say, I'm heartbroken or I feel abandoned, it moves activity from the emotional center of our brain to the rational one. In other words, the simple act of saying, this is what's happening inside me, starts to make the emotion more manageable. It doesn't erase it, it doesn't make it easy, but it gives us a starting place. And if you're thinking, I don't even know what I'm feeling, I just feel wrecked, that's okay too. Because betrayal doesn't just bring one emotion, it's usually a storm of them. Hurt, anger, confusion, self-doubt, even relief sometimes. It's messy. And if you grew up in a home where emotions weren't talked about, where you were told to toughen up or move on or just be grateful, then naming what you're feeling can feel foreign, maybe even self-indulgent, but it's neither of those things. It's survival. Betrayal shakes the foundation of what we believe about safety, loyalty, and sometimes even ourselves. And when we don't acknowledge the pain, we start making decisions from a place of unspoken fear. I've seen this over and over. People who were betrayed in one relationship shutting down in every relationship after that. Not because they don't want connection, but because they're afraid of feeling that same pain again. They think they're protecting themselves, but what they're really doing is keeping the wound from healing. That's why the first step to healing isn't rushing to fix it. It's stopping long enough to say, this hurt. This mattered. This changed something in me. Not as a way to stay stuck in the pain, but as a way to honor what you're going through. And let's be honest, this is hard. Because the world doesn't exactly create space for us to process betrayal. It tells us to move on, to not let them win, to just be stronger. But real strength isn't pretending we're fine. It's having the courage to sit in the discomfort of what's real. So if you're in that space right now, if you're sitting in the aftermath of betrayal and you don't know where to start here. Name it. not just to yourself, but out loud to someone who has earned the right to hear it. Not the person who says, ugh, just forget about it. Not the person who makes it about themselves, but the friend who knows how to sit with you in it. The one who listens without rushing you to the finish line. And if you don't have that person right now, write it down. The goal isn't to make it sound pretty or polished, it's to get it out of your head and onto something real. Because when pain stays locked inside, it grows. But when we bring it into the light, it starts to lose its grip. But it's not. Because here's the truth. You are not responsible for someone else's healing. You can support them, you can encourage them, but you cannot do the work for them. And if someone refuses to acknowledge their patterns, if they refuse to take responsibility, then no amount of effort on your part is going to change that. Smart people understand this. They don't waste their energy trying to fix someone who isn't willing to fix themselves. They don't hold on to potential. They don't cling to who someone could be if only they tried a little harder. They accept people for who they are right now, not who they might become someday. Now, does this mean they don't believe in second chances? No, but they know the difference between grace and self-sacrifice, between supporting someone and losing themselves in the process. Toxic people are great at making you feel like giving up on them means you're cold or uncaring. But walking away from someone who refuses to change doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care about yourself enough to stop bleeding for someone who keeps handing you the knife. Ugh. And let's be clear, choosing to walk away doesn't mean you're saying that person is beyond help. It just means their healing isn't your responsibility. I think a lot of us struggle with this because we've been taught that love means sacrifice, that if we truly care about someone, we should never give up on them. And that's beautiful when the love is mutual, when the effort goes both ways. But when you're the only one fighting for change, when the relationship is built on your ability to endure rather than their ability to grow, that's not love. That's self-abandonment. Smart people don't stay in relationships, romantic, platonic, or familial, where their well-being is constantly at risk. They don't let guilt keep them tied to people who refuse to take responsibility. They don't set themselves on fire just to keep someone else warm. And they don't confuse walking away with failure. Because choosing yourself isn't failure, it's freedom. It's the moment you decide that your peace, your mental health, and your self-worth are more important than holding on to someone who isn't willing to meet you halfway. At the end of the day, healing is a choice, and smart people know that the only person they can make that choice for is themselves. At the end of the day, smart people don't waste their energy trying to change toxic people. They don't bend themselves into exhaustion trying to earn respect that should have been given in the first place. They don't negotiate their boundaries, shrink their worth, or explain themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. Instead, they choose themselves. They choose their peace. They choose to walk away when necessary, not because they don't care, but because they finally realize that caring about someone doesn't mean sacrificing themselves. And that's the real power here. Because when you stop giving toxic people access to your energy, your time, and your emotions, something incredible happens. You make space. Space for the people who truly value and respect you. Space for relationships that fill you instead of drain you. Space for the version of yourself that isn't constantly second-guessing, explaining, or apologizing for simply existing. So if you've been stuck in cycles with toxic people, let this be your reminder. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to protect your peace, and you are allowed to walk away from anything that costs you your well-being. Because the people who truly love and respect you, they won't make you suffer for setting boundaries. They won't punish you for choosing yourself. And they won't require you to dim your light just so they can shine. Good luck on your journey to standing in your worth, protecting your energy, and letting go of what no longer serves you. And most of all, thank you for showing up, for listening, and for choosing to be a little braver today. I appreciate you. It won't fix everything overnight, but it will create space for what comes next. Second, set boundaries, not walls. The instinct after betrayal is to shut down, trust no one, let no one in. but self-protection isn't the same as healing. Boundaries help us protect what matters without cutting ourselves off from connection. And connection, even when it feels terrifying, is what ultimately helps us heal. I was talking to a man once who had been betrayed by his business partner. They had built something together from the ground up, spent years pouring time, energy, and trust into their work, only for that trust to be shattered in a way that left him questioning everything. And he told me, "I'll never let anyone get that close again." That was his plan for healing, locking the doors, closing the shades, and making sure no one could hurt him like that again. And listen, I get it. When we've been hurt, the most logical response seems to be never again. We think, if I don't let anyone in, I won't get hurt. If I don't trust, I won't be betrayed again. And for a while, that can feel like the safest choice. But here's the problem. Walls don't just keep the bad out. They keep the good out too. They don't just protect us from pain. They block us from the very connection that makes life meaningful. The challenge after betrayal isn't deciding whether to trust again, it's deciding how to trust again. And this is where boundaries come in. Boundaries are different from walls because they're built with intention. Walls say no one gets in ever. Boundaries say I will decide who gets access to me and how. Walls are rigid. Boundaries are flexible. Walls are about fear. Boundaries are about self-respect. One of the biggest myths about boundaries is that they push people away. But the truth is, healthy boundaries are what make deep relationships possible. Because trust isn't built on unlimited access. It's built on clarity and consistency. Knowing where we stand with people, knowing what we will and won't tolerate, and knowing that our worth isn't dependent on someone else's approval. And I'll be honest, setting boundaries after betrayal can feel unnatural at first, especially if you've been a people pleaser or someone who's been taught to keep the peace at all costs. But here's the deal. Peace at all costs is not peace. It's avoidance. And avoidance never leads to healing. So what do boundaries actually look like after betrayal? It means being clear with yourself about what you need. If someone hurt you deeply and they want back into your life, a boundary might be, I'm not ready to rebuild this relationship yet and I need space. If you're still replaying what happened, a boundary might be, I won't check their social media or reread old messages because that only keeps me stuck. If you're feeling pressure to just move on, a boundary might be, I'm allowed to take the time I need to heal, and I won't let anyone rush that process. And here's where it gets tricky. Boundaries are for you, not for controlling someone else. We don't set boundaries to change other people. We set them to honor our own well-being. If someone disrespects your boundaries, it's not a sign that you need to explain or defend them better. It's a sign that they don't respect them. And that tells you something important. One of the hardest truths about healing from betrayal is that some relationships won't make it through the process. Sometimes the betrayal reveals something about the relationship that can't be undone. And that's painful, but boundaries help you see the difference between the people who are willing to repair the trust and the ones who were only there as long as it was convenient for them. And I know this is hard. I know there's a part of you that wants things to go back to the way they were before. But here's the thing, before is gone. And that's not always a bad thing, because what comes next? When you heal, when you trust yourself, when you set boundaries that protect your peace instead of guarding your pain, what comes next is a version of you that is stronger, wiser, and still open to love. But on your own terms. That's the goal. Not shutting down, not closing off, but learning to trust in a way that protects your heart without hardening it. And that's something worth fighting for. Third, rewrite the story. Our brains are wired for storytelling, and after betrayal, the default narrative is often, I can't trust people. I must have done something wrong. This is just who I am. But we get to challenge that. We get to step back and ask, is this true? Or is this just the hurt talking? Rewriting the story doesn't mean changing the facts. It means reclaiming the meaning. I sat with a woman once who had just gone through the kind of betrayal that shakes your sense of self. Her husband had been unfaithful, and when she found out, it wasn't just the loss of the relationship that hurt, it was the loss of the identity she had built around it. She told me, I feel like a fool, like I must have missed something obvious, like I was stupid to believe in us. And you know what? I've heard some version of that story so many times. Because betrayal doesn't just hurt, it rewrites the narrative we tell ourselves about who we are. And most of the time, that new narrative isn't kind. It sounds like, I should have known better. I must not be good enough. I'm the kind of person this happens to. But here's the thing, pain writes the first draft, but we decide what the final story will be. And the first draft, it's messy. It's raw, it's full of self-blame and anger and confusion. It's completely normal. But it's also not the full truth. Neuroscience tells us that our brains are wired to create meaning from pain, even when that meaning is distorted. When something awful happens, we scramble for an explanation because uncertainty is more unbearable than even the most painful story. So if betrayal happens and the facts are unclear, our brain tries to fill in the gaps. And more often than not, we fill in those gaps with self-doubt and self-judgment. Because if we believe it was our fault, at least that gives us a sense of control. But just because a story feels true doesn't mean it is true. And the key to healing is learning to take a step back, look at the story pain is telling us, and ask, is this the only possible interpretation? Is this the story I want to carry forward? If I were telling this story about my best friend instead of myself, would I see it differently? Rewriting the story doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean ignoring the hurt or dismissing the betrayal. It means looking at the situation with honesty, without shame clouding the truth. It means shifting from, I must not be worthy of loyalty, to someone else's choices do not define my worth. It means replacing, I should have seen this coming, with, I did the best I could with the information I had. And I'll be honest, this part of the healing process can feel frustratingly slow because the old story, the one shaped by hurt, feels so real at first. It's the one we've rehearsed the most. But the good news? Our brains are built for rewiring. Research in neuroplasticity shows that every time we challenge an old belief and replace it with a healthier one, we create a new neural pathway. And over time, the new story, the true story, becomes the dominant one. And I get it, rewriting the story doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't change the betrayal, but it does change what we carry forward. And that's everything, because if we don't rewrite the story, we risk living in the aftermath forever. We risk letting someone else's actions dictate the way we see ourselves for years to come. But when we take ownership of the narrative, we get to decide what this experience means, not just what it was. And if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know how to rewrite my story yet, that's okay. It starts small. It starts with noticing when the old script kicks in, when you hear yourself saying, I'll never trust again, or I must not be worth loyalty, and gently asking, is that true? Or is that just the wound talking? It starts with catching yourself in the painful story and reminding yourself that you get to choose a different ending. And the real power, that ending hasn't been written yet, but it's yours to write. Fourth, allow yourself to grieve. Betrayal isn't just about broken trust, it's about loss. The loss of what you thought was real, the loss of safety, the loss of a version of the future you believed in. And grief isn't just for death, it's for everything that mattered and changed. When we skip over grief, we don't actually move on. We just carry the pain with us in ways we don't recognize until much later. I remember talking to someone who had been betrayed by a close friend. A decade-long friendship built on shared experiences, deep conversations, inside jokes gone in an instant. And what he said stuck with me. I feel ridiculous grieving a friendship. It's not like someone died, but something did die. The trust, the connection, the sense of belonging he had with that person. And when we refuse to grieve, we deny ourselves the chance to heal. Grief isn't neat. It doesn't follow a timeline, and it doesn't show up the way we expect. Sometimes it looks like sadness. Sometimes it looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like feeling completely numb, and the temptation, especially after betrayal, is to outrun it, to distract, to stay busy, to say, I should be over this by now. But healing doesn't work that way. Psychologists talk about something called disenfranchised grief, the kind of grief that isn't always acknowledged by the world. We understand grieving when someone passes away, but when we lose trust in someone we love, when a friendship or marriage or partnership shatters, the world doesn't always make space for that kind of grief. We're told, move on. Don't give them your energy, just forget about it. But ignoring grief doesn't erase it, it just buries it deeper. And here's what I know, grief demands to be felt. If we don't process it in a healthy way, it will find its way out in unhealthy ways. Through bitterness, through shutting down, through dragging the past into every new relationship, every new opportunity, every new experience. Because when we don't heal, we replay the same pain over and over again. So what does grieving betrayal actually look like? It looks like giving yourself permission to feel the loss without judging yourself for it. It looks like saying, this mattered, this hurt, this deserves space to be acknowledged. It looks like letting go of the expectation that healing should be fast or linear or tidy, because it won't be. And I get it. Grief is uncomfortable. It doesn't come with a roadmap. And most of us weren't taught how to sit with it. We were taught how to distract ourselves from it. But distraction isn't healing. And the only way out of grief is through it. I once heard someone describe grief as a wave. At first, it knocks you down so hard, you don't think you'll ever stand again. But over time, the waves get further apart. They still come, and some of them still hurt, but you get stronger at standing back up. And that's the process. That's what healing actually looks like. And if you're in the middle of that storm right now, if you're feeling like the waves are too big, like you'll never get past this, know this. Grief isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you loved, that you trusted, that you showed up fully, and that is never something to be ashamed of. Grieving doesn't mean you're stuck, it means you're human. And humans heal by feeling, not by ignoring. So let the grief come, let it move through you, let it shape you, but don't let it define you. Because this is not the end of your story, it's just part of it. And you are allowed to take all the time you need. Fifth, choose to live wholeheartedly again. Betrayal has a way of making us feel like we need to shrink, like the safest option is to close off, play small, and never let ourselves be that vulnerable again. But that's not living, that's surviving. And you deserve more than just survival. I once sat with someone who had been betrayed in a way that cut so deep, they swore they'd never open their heart again. I won't give anyone that much power over me ever again, they said, and I get it. I've been there. We all have. That moment where we think, if I never let myself care that much, I'll never get hurt that badly again. It's a logical response. It's self-protection. But here's the problem. When we shut out the possibility of pain, we also shut out the possibility of joy. And I know what you're thinking. That's easy to say, but how do I actually do it? How do I trust life again when it's already proven that it can knock me flat? The answer isn't quick. It's not a single moment where you flip a switch and suddenly feel open again. It's a choice, a daily, intentional choice to move forward without letting the past dictate your future. The research on resilience tells us something powerful. People who recover from deep hurt aren't necessarily the ones who forget what happened, but the ones who refuse to let it define them. They are the ones who, even when it's terrifying, choose to show up for life again. Not blindly, not recklessly, but with courage. And courage, by definition, requires vulnerability. It means showing up and risking being seen, knowing there are no guarantees. It means believing in connection again, even when part of you wants to pull back. It means rewriting the story so that betrayal isn't the final chapter. I'm not saying you need to pretend everything is fine. I'm not saying you need to trust recklessly or jump into situations before you're ready. What I am saying is this. At some point, healing requires us to say, I will not let the worst thing that happened to me be the thing that defines me forever. I've heard people say, I'll open up again when I know I won't get hurt. But that's not how trust works. That's not how life works. Every meaningful thing we do, every love, every friendship, every creative pursuit, every dream, it all carries risk. There is no certainty. But there is courage, and courage is the decision to keep showing up anyway. This doesn't mean rushing the process. It doesn't mean forcing yourself to be ready before you are. It means listening to the part of you that still believes in something bigger than the pain, the part of you that still wants to feel alive. And here's what I know for sure. The strongest people I've ever met aren't the ones who have never been hurt. They're the ones who have been hurt deeply and still choose to love, still choose to trust, still choose to build something beautiful out of the wreckage, not because it's easy, but because they refuse to let the pain have the last word. So when you're ready, and only when you're ready, step back into the world. Let yourself be seen. Let yourself feel joy again. Let yourself risk connection, knowing that yes, it might not always be safe, but it will always be worth it. Because this is your life, and you get to decide how it's lived. Healing from betrayal is not about pretending it didn't happen. It's not about bypassing the pain or forcing yourself to be okay before you are. It's about honoring what was lost, giving yourself permission to grieve, and then, when you're ready, choosing to live fully again. It's about refusing to let someone else's choices define who you are. Refusing to let hurt harden you, refusing to shrink your life out of fear, because you are more than what happened to you. You are more than the pain. And if you're still in the thick of it, if you're still trying to find solid ground after everything has been shaken, let me remind you, healing is not a straight line. Some days will feel better, some days will feel worse, but every single step forward, no matter how small, is a step toward reclaiming yourself, and you are worth reclaiming. So be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, and when you're ready, step back into the world with the courage to trust, to love, and to live wholeheartedly again, because you deserve nothing less. Good luck on your journey, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for choosing healing. Thank you for being here.